It's those little things that keep me finding my way back to the Orange County line.
All right. Well, thank you guys who have attended, and thank you especially to our authors and dignitaries, we'll call them tonight, and for Dr. Brandy Terrell for agreeing to host us and moderate a bit of a discussion, and then to post this on her podcast, The Why, with Dr. Brandy Terrell, where you can listen anywhere podcasts can be found. So my name is Joe Lannon. And I'd like to welcome you all, dignitaries and guests, to Timeless French Lick, our visitor center. We've got a pretty special thing happening here right now. We're hosting a Smithsonian exhibit, and in honor of us hosting that Smithsonian exhibit, the United States of America has decided to celebrate its 250th birthday. I think it's actually the other way around. That's meant to be a joke, but we thought that hosting this exhibit, finding a grant to pay for it, bringing it in, and building some community rally around it was a perfect way to celebrate not just 250 years of democracy, but almost 200 years of tourism right here in our destination in Orange County. So um, we decided to host an event to highlight some local authors to go along with this exhibit in the celebration of democracy, because it's my belief, and I think the belief of many, that words written on paper or typed into a document is one of the greatest acts of agency that all of us have as individuals, but certainly as a country that we have demonstrated in our 250 years of ups and downs and past in history. And far before that, when you look through this exhibit, you see the Declaration of Independence. When the folks signed their name at the bottom of that document, they weren't just declaring independence. They weren't declaring 250 years of democracy. They were actually committing high treason. Now, hopefully, most of our authors haven't committed high treason in their writings today, but I think in our questioning tonight, and hopefully in some of our discussion, we'll hear from you all about how you've used your writing to create agency, to create your voice, and to advocate for whatever it is, whether it's history or self or others or preservation or simply to tell a story. And that's something that I could do all night if I was given the podcast mic, but you're not here to hear me. You're here to hear from your authors. So pretty soon here, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Brandy Terrell, but I just wanted to um, offer some hospitality and a little bit of a welcome. Of course, we have restrooms and we've got charcuterie and drinks and staff here if you have any questions. So feel free to move about the cabin, if you will, during this time. But I certainly want to welcome all of our guests and turn this over to Dr. Terrell.
All right. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks for the invitation. I'm super excited about today, and I have some really great folks here. So, what we're going to do first is do the author features. So, basically, we're just going to let everybody take a few minutes, and we're going to just tell some really good stories and have everybody have a little bit of time, and then we'll move into the moderated piece of the actual guided discussion. And then we will conclude with the book features and sales as well. So I'm going to start with Susan first, and I didn't get to ask you if we're related because we probably are
Probably someone.
somewhere, but I really want to just give you an opportunity to talk about your book and to talk about what inspired the writing and anything else that you feel is appropriate for this America 250.
Well, I've written like a wide range of things because I spent 8 years traveling and got to see a lot of interesting things and stuff like that. Um, my whole thing with writing started in like elementary school. First book, Charlie, and my grandmother, she was a great storyteller, and I would sit at her kitchen table and she would tell me stories about history and stories about her job when she worked for Saul Strauss and Paoli and just different things, you know. And she would tell ghost stories, and I'd be so terrified to go home at night because she could just tell stories so well. And then when in school, I started writing stories, and I was always interested in stories and telling stories. And then when I became a teacher, it became even more of a thing of telling stories because kids love to hear stories. That was the one time I didn't have to say, sit down, be quiet, stop doing that. They would just be rapt attention. The worst kid in the class would be like just glued to everything I was saying. So I always tried to encourage them to write. And then I got into the National Writing Project. I did that for 3 summers. It's just a room full of teachers, and we're all churning out our own poems and short stories and trying to find new ways to get kids excited about writing and doing that kind of thing. So that's when I wrote my first novel, and it was a fiction novel. Um, it took me the whole summer to write it, and it was a process. But over time, I've learned that it's easier to write about personal experience. So most of my subsequent novels have been about personal experience, the travels, places I've been, things I've seen, historical things, stuff like that. Um, my favorite book that I've written is The Haunted Tales from Indiana and Beyond. That goes back to Granny's Kitchen because a lot of the stories she told me are in here. And so I've added some others to that. But that's my favorite book so far. Um, I think the thing that fascinates me about storytelling is that you can take people on this journey. Like I can remember my 6th graders at Salem Middle School being like coming in after lunch and saying, "Oh, Miss Terrell, tell us a story about the old days when you were growing up." And they would just sit there and just listen, and they would like, "Oh, that's so cool," because things now are so much different than they were in like the 70s. I would talk about things like, well, what's that? Well, what's that? They were so interested. So you can take somebody to a whole different place and time. And if you do it well enough, they're going to remember that story forever. Just like Granny's story she told me, I remember all of them because she did such a good job of that. If somebody was thinking about writing their own story, I would tell them to do it. There's probably somebody out there that's wanting to read that story. But even if you don't do it for somebody else, do it for yourself because it's such a, I don't know, such a neat thing to write the story and then people read it and actually like it and comment on it and it makes them have their own stories to tell. So I just think that's kind of a neat thing about storytelling.
Yeah, I agree. I always when I love to read. Writing, no, but reading. And I think that the best ones is when you know they're good, when you can envision every single detail in your head. I mean, you have the movie playing in your head as you are reading and turning the page.
Mhm.
There's nothing more wonderful than that. So I appreciate the time and discussing a little bit. So I'm going to move around, and Ron, it's you. You're
Okay.
up. About the same
About the
questions. How
same
about
question.
that?
Um, I just formulated my answer while she was speaking. Um, in 1968 and 69, I had an Indianapolis News, the afternoon paper, when there was such a thing, at delivery route here in West Baden. And one of my customers happened to be an African American gentleman named William Hauser, and he lived way up the hill here, and he was a World War I veteran, had been in the ambulance corps and so forth. And one day there were hornets in his mailbox, and he said, "Oh, just bring it up here." Then we started talking, and he started telling me stories. And he actually was living there when the Great Fire, burned the hotel, and and at that point I was hooked. And and there were other storytellers in town and so forth. Uh, just that had within my own family and neighbors and so forth. And that's kind of where I got the passion for doing that. Um, Also, um, I was also a teacher for 33 years in middle school at Milan, Indiana, and uh, I same thing. I realized that if you could enhance the story or the lesson with a story, the kids were much more receptive to it. Uh, we were doing something one time about um, the depression, and I tried to explain to them they didn't understand the Great Depression. And my father, who'd grown up in Northwest Township, was he only got shoes when it was time for school, and he wore them to school the first day, and then he waded in the creek on the way home forgot his shoes. They got washed away, and he got a paddling or whipping or whatever because he had to buy new shoes. And the kids couldn't comprehend that story. They go, "Why didn't you just get another pair of shoes?" Well, it's the Great Depression. You just didn't that. And I too think that I can't draw, I can't crochet, um, all those things, but uh, something I could produce and that I enjoyed and found therapeutic is to write, and you have control of that medium, and there are not a lot of rules. There are no standards to meet for the state
Mm.
and so forth. To that you have to make sure you hit this certain standard in the lesson, and so that's why I enjoy it. And um, there's some other things where people get rewards out of it. It's not a financial boon, but it really makes some people's lives. So that's kind of my introduction to it.
That is amazing. And I'm curious now that we have so far 2 schools teachers. I bet you could write a lot of books about teaching.
Yes,
And teaching the
yes,
students. And
yes.
um my daughter works at the at one of the local schools, and she decided she wasn't going to wear makeup or whatever one day, and she had about 3 kids tell her, "Are you sick? What's wrong with you? You don't look very good today." I mean, they're truthful.
Mhm.
They're truthful.
No,
All right.
no filter is what
No,
that's
no,
called.
no, no. And I, that just
No filter.
it's okay. But okay, moving on a little bit. Okay, Randy, you're up. Say why?
So I'm from, this has made me think,
Yeah.
why am I sitting here? So I grew up in Southern Illinois, a very rural area, and people told stories. That's how they explained things. That's how you saw there was understanding there. And everybody told stories. If they had a problem or they were trying to teach you something, it came as a story. So I was automatically interested in stories. And as I got older, I started getting interested in things to write about. Somebody once said, so I've written several books. I've written one uh, the only uh, religious denomination that started in Indiana, which I was. It's a sect of the Baptist Church, which I was a member of. And then I did 4 military histories. I did one on politics. I did 2 on politics, frontier politics. And somebody who knew me real well said, these are all autobiographical. Because I struggled with the question of, is this my denomination? What do I think about religion? The draft and Vietnam and all the stories I heard from the World War II guys and out in the fields and those kinds of things. Uh, Politics, my dad was in politics and that befuddled me. So that was the line for a lot of my books. But somewhere along the line, after doing full of military books, they were so depressing because I did a lot of interviews with people who've been in combat
Yeah.
and seen a lot of really bad stuff, that I decided to do something a little more lighthearted. And it was, again, autobiographical. I wrote about a little school that I played basketball. Uh, I played basketball there in Southern Illinois, 100 kids, single class basketball. I came from a very small rural area. We didn't even have indoor courts. And so when I went to that high school, I was kind of big and rough and tough because I grew up on a farm. And so I started as a freshman and I thought, oh my gosh. And I couldn't fix tractors and I could drive them, but oftentimes I wrecked them. But now I'm good at something. And the old farmers are coming up and saying, I saw your name in the paper. And so that drew me close to my dad for the years of that play because he was a very quiet man. And so suddenly the story was about my basketball. It was really about my father and I. When it was all over with, that was the main theme. But by my sophomore year, I was starting, and my senior year, a little school, 100 class basketball, we had the longest winning streak in the state. Now I wasn't that good, but I was a guy that knocked people around underneath. So anyway, I wrote that story, and that was fun. And after that, I thought I want to do another basketball story. Well, what can I write about? Well, I taught at Lagodi, and I'd seen Larry play, Larry
Another
Bird.
teacher. Okay.
Yeah, Larry
Okay.
Bird play in that classic game. Every book about Larry Bird talks about the Lagodi Springs Valley game that Larry. It's the only game Larry said he wished he'd had back because. And I was there at 28. The gym what was it? 2,800 people, and there were like 4,000 people there. And Bob Knight and 5 other major college coaches, and so kind of at ground zero. And then I went to school with Larry's brother Mark at Oakland City, and I knew Larry Bird as Mark Bird's brother, and he never talked. He just looked like at the floor. So that was fun to do. And like when you do books, you learn things you didn't know you were going to learn. So that's how I got into writing sports history in the Larry Bird book.
That is amazing. As you three have been talking, the thing that comes to my mind, other than man, school teaching and books would be really good to write about, but is I'm anxiety. Is how do you get these stories on paper, and how do you get them to make sense? And
Yeah.
it seems so daunting to me because I am not a writer, but those are some.
As an academic, I taught in college. I had to write, and so I had to learn those things. And then when I started writing fun things, I had all the skills. But for a major book like that, it'd take about 2 years just to get there, where you start looking maybe for a publisher, maybe 4 years altogether. But Mr. Lannon was talking about democracy. I don't think I got to thinking about it. Just hit me now to make an interesting book. How democratic basketball is in Indiana and Southern Illinois. Yeah. If you work hard, you can play. You get to play no matter who your dad is or how wealthy they are and so forth. So again, another possible.
Well, there's a book.
idea for a
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lead for another book. Yeah.
I'll
Okay.
give that one to Ron.
Yeah. All right. Okay, Roger.
Okay.
I am really glad you're kind of a podcast celebrity. Like this is your second time on here, so high expectations here. But tell me, what about you?
Okay. Well, my background is different from the other three folks who've been sharing with us this evening. They come from education backgrounds. My background was in newspapering. I guess I'll start by saying that somehow at about junior high age, I knew that I wanted to write. I didn't know what I wanted to write. I thought I was going to write fiction. I can't. But I did find out that I could be in newspapers. And so that's how I spent a 40-year career. And so finding stories about people was my job. I mean,
Yeah.
it was incumbent upon me, and I had a lot of flexibility in what I could write and choosing individuals that I could interview and tell their stories. And I know it's cliche, but everybody has a story. And so it was those stories and the opportunities that I had, each and every week as my work week would come together to find those folks who were interesting. I didn't, nothing against education, nothing against city and county government, but that's not what I wanted to do all day and all night, write about those meetings. So it was finding those interesting people and telling those stories. And the other thing about telling stories, and I think everybody here can relate to this, because I would venture that there's not a person in this room who hasn't said after grandma and grandpa or mom and dad were gone, I wish I could ask them this, or I wish I had this story. And they may have related it, but I've forgotten all the pieces. And so the stories get away. I observed the other day that as I get older, there are fewer people in my life that I've known all of my life. And I made that observation because a good friend had passed away, and I've been at his funeral today. And there are so many stories that are gone. He may have related some of them to me in the past, but I would like to find myself going back and hearing them over and over again, but they're gone. I did have the experience. He had told me one a few years ago, and I said, you need to write this down. I didn't think he ever did, but I found out today at the service he had written it down. There was a copy of it there. So that one was saved. But stories just get away. I would talk about for a minute about some of the things that I have done. Sometimes I think of myself less as a writer, as just more of as one who just compiles things. Ron didn't talk about our joint project that we had 4 or 5 years ago, and that was when we together put together a book about letters written home to Orange County from uh, our military heroes serving in World War II. I was inspired to do that after realizing that during World War II, as the soldiers would write letters home, that the families would actually take them into the newspaper, and the newspaper would publish those. And when I saw those, I thought, these need to come back. They shouldn't get away. And so I started typing them. Ron tells the story better than I do, but somehow or another, Ron and I had a phone conversation one night. I didn't know him. 10 minutes later, Ron, we were collaborating on this book. And between us, particularly with Ron's background as a teacher, we made that come together. So, but again, it was more of an instance of compiling. My next project, I ventured into historical writing. I didn't know what that was exactly. So I got some guidance from a friend of mine who does write historical fiction. And I'm going to pull this out. I hope everybody can see it. All all of my adult life, I heard about this Life magazine photographer coming to Paoli in 1947 to write about Paoli as just the as being representative of small town America. And uh, so when the photographer came, spent a week shadowing a newspaper reporter, the Paoli News Republican. Uh, I'm not sure what the actual name of the paper was at that time, and just kind of following her around on assignment. I had to know more. I thought, and coming from a newsroom background, I wanted to know. I didn't bring the magazine because the magazines are fragile, and after all these years, but I did put this together. And so those are some of the photographs that were included in that photo layout. I wanted to know more, and I guess coming from a news background, I thought I wanted to know the conversations that took place in the newsroom before he went out to take the photographs. I wanted to know what the conversations were like after he got back from an assignment. And I felt like with my experience in the newsroom, I could kind of conjure up something that I thought was probably pretty accurate. And I didn't know this photographer, of course, but I kind of wanted, I, I kind of wanted to paint a picture of what I thought he was like and what kind of person he was. And so I made him who I wanted to be. Interestingly enough, after Life in Pale 1947 was published and was circulating, I was able to track down, thanks to the internet, his daughter in the Pacific Northwest and sent her a book. And I said, "How did I portray your dad?" And she said that was him. So he was what I wanted him to be. So anyway, that's kind of what inspired that. And I just wanted to know what it was like during his visit. It's historical fiction. I invented 3 characters. My friend that I talked to said, "Yes, you can do that in historical fiction. You can do that to move along, to develop plot and develop your characters." So I did that. And then the most recent thing that I just completed here a few weeks ago, Newsmakers 250, in direct relationship with the celebration of the Americas 250, was inspired by a couple of professors at IU Southeast. During the bicentennial year in 2016, they put together Indiana's 200, and they put together just short profiles on 200 people who had contributed to Indiana over the years. And I thought, I can do that. Not necessarily statewide, but just locally. And I knew from my experience with the paper and all that I had in my archives that I could bring up those stories again and talk about, well, it sounds as though it's 250 people. It's more than that. I couldn't stop. And just talk about the people who we've all heard of. We know some of their stories. It was largely gathered from my own archives, but it also includes people whose names may not be that well known, but there are people in there who their names were just brought back because they were known for. Remember, we used to talk about random acts of kindness, just kind things they would do for people. So there's a variety of criteria in determining whose stories I was going to tell. So 250 plus stories are told in that book. It's a pretty good balance of Orange and Lawrence County folks.
And that book is finished or
It,
no?
it it's
Yes.
it's finished now.
Yes? Okay. Okay.
Again, it's Newsmakers 250, 1776 to 2026, and just some remarkable stories about people.
So there's a few things when after all of you have been talking here, and then especially you, Roger. when we see something in print, it's different. It feels different. I think that it for me, since we've kind of moved more so in the last 10, 20 years into different mediums, our phone and Kindles and iPads, whatever. But to see something in paper, print, I remember in high school after our football games on Friday, we would beat it up to K&E Market in Camelsburg to make sure we had a copy of the
Times Mail.
Times Mail and Times Mail printed in color. So, I mean, this was a thing. Like you would gather at the local little gas station to get the paper after the ball games.
Right.
And we had an exceptionally good year that year. So you had to get up there early or you would not have a paper. And I remember that. And that's the first thing. The second thing is, as I was preparing for the America 250, the time capsule, and I thought, oh, you're going to be here and the deadline's 4 days away, so I better bring my stuff. There's such an appreciation as we were collecting information as a family. And that's what we chose for our time capsule is, as a family, how is this important to us? And what do we want to tell that generation 50 years from now about us? And just the ability to be able to decide that and to tell that story on the back of the photos in marker was quite an experience in itself.
Right.
So I think that this is just a wonderful opportunity for us because it means so much more than just being here talking about your book. It's so much bigger than that for all of you.
Somewhere I read a book, and the end of it was, in the end, all we have is our stories. I can't remember what else was going with it. I just remember, wow, I'm going to write that down and share that sometime.
And I think one of the comments you had made earlier reminds me of Philip Goley has written several, books of different things. And I always is very enjoyed his perspective on the types of books that he reads. And there's some kind of local history in his books as well. But you don't really think about that stuff until there's an opportunity like this. And then your brain just floods with, oh my, what about this or what about that? Or and we forget how precious storytelling is.
A point on Roger. The characters and the profiles of 250 people from Orange and Lawrence County, 250 stories, and I still didn't make the cut.
Well, see, I'm thinking the same thing. I'm thinking, Roger, did I not have a paragraph in there?
I did try to tell.
I'm glad you said it first.
I did try to tell people to read the foreword because it did explain all the criteria for how folks were chosen.
We didn't make the criteria.
Well,
that's what he's trying to say. Yeah.
Well, another book to be written.
Okay.
I mean, I'll do it.
The ones I left out.
The ones.
There you go.
Well, interestingly, I had some people say, "Why am I in there?" And I'm like, "You're part of the story, and I can't just mark you out. You're in there."
Yeah. Wow. Well, it is amazing. I think we might be just a little ahead of the schedule. But if you don't mind, I'd like to jump into just some conversation and some kind of questioning, if you're all right with that. Unless any of you have anything else that maybe you forgot in the conversations of others. And
I just wanted to tag on what Roger said. We did not know each other before we did this book together. And he had stumbled across a post. My maternal grandfather was Champ Dewhurst from Paola. And he was the town constable and also the town drunk. And my uncles had also been star basketball players in the 40s. And it's something, and Roger had stumbled across one of their letters home in his research, and he sent me a Facebook message and explained what he was doing. I vaguely remembered Roger's name from the paper, and he said, "Can I call you tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure." And so we talked for about 15 minutes, and went out in the living room and from my man cave, and my wife, I said, "Hey," I said, "I'll write a book with this guy." She says, "I thought you said you didn't know him." I said, Yeah, I don't. And you're going to write a book with it? Yeah. And so, and then we found out, well, obviously we had a lot in common, a lot of similar interests. And I'll tell you something that I enjoyed about that project was we had book signings, the Historical Society and the library, or, yeah, the library and so forth, is the research and being able to relay their thoughts or think through their their point of view was it gave so many people an opportunity to talk about people that they hadn't been able to speak about in years, and that was just it was just so rewarding, and the people were in tears, and and remembering these people, and they were so happy to be that someone had taken the time to do that, and that was probably the biggest paycheck that we got from that. Roger,
Yes,
I don't want to speak
yes.
for you.
No, no, I think you're exactly right. And we were both able to bring different things to that project. Uh, I focused on, well, in addition to just typing the letters verbatim, I focused on follow-ups. If not for the individual, well, yes, for the individuals who came home and talked with the families of those who didn't get to come home. And so I was able to kind of bring it up to now. Ron, having taught history, was a much better World War II scholar than I ever will be. So he was able to provide some introspective related to the given letters. So it was a good partnership.
And that was very easy because these letters were so personal. You felt like you knew that person like the back of it. Oh yeah, this is my the letters that a matter of fact, several of the letters when they wrote home, they asked how the local basketball team was doing. This
They
was
did.
so
That's not surprising.
that's not
Indeed.
surprising, but
At
that
all.
but you just they were so personal that you just felt like I can think for this person and speak for this person, and hopefully we did justice to.
There's nothing closer to a time machine than a letter. When I did military history, those letters, and you could also use them because I was interviewing these guys and they tell a story. I said, well, you said this in the letter. Oh, yeah. And they would start, it would remind them of things because it was a living thing and it would
Yeah.
bring them all those thoughts back.
Mhm.
And I know in writing military history stories, I often had the letters of the last letters guys wrote home. And those were always powerful. And you could almost feel them sensing that they weren't coming home because there was a wisdom there for an 18-year-old kid that
There was a
normally
taste
wouldn't
of that in the letters from
Yes.
Julie Roger that we
Yes.
we saw some of that.
That happens to be when I met Randy for the first time, because he believed in us and wrote a little endorsement for the back of the book. So
And I said they were like time machines.
yes, you did. Yes, you did.
So, Susan, what about you? What advice would you give someone who, well, someone like me, who would be like, I'd like to write all kinds of stories, but have zero idea on how to start and what what do we need? What do we need to do? What would you tell someone?
You just start. I mean, well, it depends on what you're wanting to write. I mean, if it's a fiction time like that first fiction novel I wrote, I sat down, I ruminated about my characters and the plot and all that kind of thing. And it was exhausting. And then when I wrote the next thing, which was the Haunted Tales from Indiana, that was easy because it was already written in my head. I was just retelling the stories that I had been told, or experiences I had had out ghost hunting, or things like that, or things kids had told me. It was pre-written, and everything that I pretty much have written after that has been pre-written. It's like I've ruminated on it, and when I sit down, it's just there. It's already done. It's just going back and fixing and fine tuning and all that kind of thing because it's personal experience. So there's not a whole lot of research you have to do. Mine is, traveling across the United States in an RV and working the RV parks and what's RV living like. What do you need to know going into it? Because I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about an RV. I knew nothing about working campgrounds. So I'm thinking a lot of people wanting to do this now. So I'm going to write this to kind of help them understand the things that I didn't know whenever I got into it. The same thing with the Jeep living in a Jeep for 6 months and traveling around. What's it entail? It's being homeless is what it is. It's a glorified way of saying you've agreed to be homeless because you're living in a tent and you're unpacking everything and you're packing it back up the next day and you're putting it in the Jeep and you're going to the next point on the map, and it's exhausting. So anybody who glorifies that and says, "Oh, this is," no, they're lying to you. They're having a really good day, but the truth is it's horrible. And there were days I wanted to pitch that tent as far as I could pitch it. And I questioned myself, why are you doing this? Who chooses to do this? Well, you did. And look where you're at. You're in the middle of the desert now. So yeah, I mean, it was like, it's like a teaching thing. My personal experience books are like teaching people. It's explaining, if you don't like doing this, then don't do this because this is what it entails. It's like, it's the teacher thing in me still screaming to get out and explain and, educate.
One of that reminds me that, and someone mentioned it too, about just the oral history and getting that written down and the value, because my grandparents, they told the scariest stories about the hills of Kentucky, where they came from.
My dad.
Yes, and all these things, and they were ghost stories.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a kid, you kind of grow with that. And then I noticed that I tell our kids those same stories, and they're like, "Mom, come on, that didn't have to happen." Yeah, your great grandma said that this is what happened in the holler, and it's just bizarre things that you don't even realize is real, and we don't realize the value of them until there's no one there to tell them anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the shame, is that there's so many wonderful stories that pull us together and
That,
remind us of who we are.
even though that's a tie into what she said, J.D. Vance, Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah, I read
When
that.
my wife and I met at Berea College in Eastern Kentucky, and her father was from that region and so forth, and I felt like I was listening to my father-in-law.
There was nothing in
J-
that I thought, what I knew.
yeah, you knew that culture.
You knew, yes. Yeah.
Trips back to set up with the body, and my wife can tell more than I can. But yeah, that's who I felt like was talking to. So, but
Susan described experiences that I've never had, and so I'm intrigued by it. Well, what's that like? How does that work? Uh, I've always been more likely to write about things that people can relate to, but both of them work.
Mhm. Yeah, they absolutely do work. And well, just the when it depends on I think our stage of life too. So when I was raising children and way too young to raise children and really didn't know what I was doing, books were the parenting key, right? They were the what to expect when expecting was the things, or what to expect when you have a 2-year-old or whatever. There was so much value in that, in that learning, that you could open a book, you could feel it, you could go back to it, you could envision it, and not just for storytelling but for survival. And then as my kids became teenagers, I moved into the chicken soup for the souls and the hold on, it'll be okay, and they'll survive books. But it's a gateway to freedom. It's a gateway to so many, such an opportunity to learn.
I think you've hit on something about fiction and even historical writing and letters and so forth. It's teaching things that you may not have experienced. I remember when I would interview veterans, and the first time you would get their name, rank, and serial number, and then the next time you get their funny stories, the next time you might get a little bit more. But about the sixth time you were turning the tape recorder off and you were hearing the things that they needed to tell, that you would awaken, and now you had to listen to it. It was going to go in the book, but uh, whether those things are stated in a piece or not, or in a letter, you can still feel the vibe of it. You kind of know it without knowing it, if the story's written well, I think.
And that's true. I think when our youngest child, our son, went to Hoosier Boys State, and that is if you went there, you could write it, you could write an essay or submit a scholarship, but you had to have a relative who had served in combat. And my grandfather was a World War II ambulance driver, and he was a stern man for a reason. I mean, you knew, but he never would, not once would he tell anything about his service. But when our son was applying for the scholarship, we had to get his discharge papers, and we were able to. We got them from the archives, and we have his discharge. I don't know what any of that means, and I'm telling you, even ChatGPT don't know what that means. But it does show. It did show his service locations. It showed his rank. It showed his pay. It showed a lot of different things. But I there's no. I don't know. There's so much history that is not there, and but where he was located, which I didn't realize I was going to talk about, so I don't know the exact locations, but it was significant.
Yes.
Now I know why he didn't
Locations
say
can tell you a
anything.
lot.
I know exactly why he was the way that he was, and why he behaved in ways that he behaved, because I know what was on that discharge, because I know the locations where he was stationed, and they were not easy locations. Um, and that
And he was driving an ambulance.
and he was
so-
driving an
Yeah.
ambulance. So now and really it helped me to understand him. But I wish I would have known that while he was alive. It would have made a
I
difference.
don't think the World War II guys, they were hard to squeeze it out. The Korean War and Vietnam, and probably
Mm.
because their wars were more cluster, and they were still renating and trying
Yeah.
to figure it out. But my dad was like that. That's why when I wrote the book about him and basketball, that was the only time it was ever close. When he was in South Pacific, he never talked about any of that. That just always bothered me.
But you know what he did do? He taught me how to fold a flag. And we were in trouble if we didn't do it right,
Right.
or if it touched the ground.
Yep.
Like we knew
I
that.
understand it.
We knew that. We still know that.
And Roger and I were lucky enough to get that insight from these letters. Um, you know, and my uncles, I had 4 uncles from Orange County that were in the service, and they talked about it in very limited ways, and but once those letters, there was more revealed there than, because they were opening their hearts and their souls and so forth to their loved ones, and so we got to peek at that, which increased my understanding and appreciation for it.
Yeah. One of, as we kind of talked to, one of the stories in our family is my great uncle. You were of a night, you were leery because we didn't know what it was at the time, and my mother didn't, but it was PTSD.
Yeah,
That's what that was. The symptomology was PTSD, but he would wake up and grab a gun, and it was kind of dangerous for a very long time. But he's a Vietnam veteran, and when mom would tell the story, even then we didn't know, because I was a kid, that it was post-traumatic stress disorders, what that exactly was. And now I do know that. Now oh, okay, that makes so much sense.
But the impact it has on the family.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, with Larry Bird, his father had killed a Chinese soldier, hand-to-hand combat, and he had that.
You carry it.
Yeah, and you carry it, and Larry was in that by I think, and all the people like that. But again, it's never said. But when you see what Larry struggles with and the family and so forth. One of the things, one of the really interesting things about writing the Larry Bird book was the control of the narrative, which he shut down all the high school stuff. And when I came along, it was 50 years later, and I was able to get to that and get some of that stuff out. But up until that time, that stuff was put in there. You have to be careful with that but I'd written military history before, so I knew, wow, this had to have an impact on that family, that the father had those issues.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask just kind of a standard question for everybody, but what is a topic that you feel is still that for you still yet to be written about? So I'm gonna kind of round robin that for anybody
I'm
who
sorry,
wants
but
to.
the agenda didn't say anything about that
Well, I
pop
tricked you.
quiz.
I completely tricked you because I want to know. What do you think?
um,
What needs to be preserved?
um, I think I've done part of it in the book that I've just done, The Last Resort. And there was on the questions that you provided for earlier,
That I did not pay attention to.
what inspired The Last Resort, and the story surrounding the West Baden fire. Um, the story starts with the fire, and then the plot and the characterization. Uh, that's just a phoenix rising catalyst for the story. Um, the main character happens to be a teenage African American boy, and he's a little bit different than the other African American citizens that lived here in the valley. That would have been very unique for any small town in the Midwest uh, during that time period. And he's a little bit different because his father owns the local baseball team, and so he has a different status. But I'm wondering what it would be like uh, to immerse yourself in the culture of the African Americans that were the foundation of the valley here. And it would have been it would have been so different than other places where they'd grown up in the South or wherever, where they would have family, uh, they would have uh, family support, a network type thing. These people were basically just drawn to this area because of employment, and in a time when it wasn't easy for an African American person to survive. And I just really would like to know the ins and outs of that. Mr. Hauser, who kind of inspired me, he experienced some of that, but of course I haven't seen him since 1969. Um, and I just wondering and then that's part of what I did in this book, kind of imagine what that would have been like. Uh, you know, a waiter comes in here from Chicago or Detroit or so forth, and you're suddenly in this, culture shock would have been for them. And I'm just wondering, how that, you know, how they were treated. And I found that they were treated in some ways they were treated very well, which is admirable about the people. And then there were a few incidents where values changed, perhaps the leadership of the community changed, and there were issues. So I thought that would make a fascinating story over a roots type, generational type story. So that's my answer. Nobody can copy it.
Well, and I think that you are right in the way to do that is to write and to honor and to do it in a way that is appropriate and culturally appropriate,
Right.
and that's how we change things.
Right. I think if we could make someone see that
Yeah.
that struggle, I'm sure it was a struggle at times, and the acceptance and so forth. I think that would be a good lesson. I think.
I
So
think that's a good answer. Who wants to go next? Because you're all going to answer this.
here's the
So.
bar, guys.
Yeah. The
Here's
bar
the
set
bar.
up high. I'm really sorry about that, and I'm sorry about the pop quiz. But no, I'm not really sorry. But so who wants to go? What do you think?
I don't think anything has really been written about the dark side of Orange County.
Ah, tell me.
I know all kinds of stories about, I've substantiated. I don't know if they're factual or not, but I think some of them are just
Which
different.
part of the dark side are we talking about? Because I'm thinking all kinds of things here.
Well, I'm like mob connections and
Ah,
things like that. Bodies buried in a station wagon somewhere in the county. Things like that.
that's fascinating. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to take your time up. My father or my grandfather in the Bedster garage that we can see from here worked on Al Capone's 12-cylinder Lincoln with bulletproof glass and combination door locks. And when he slid underneath it on the creeper thing to work on it, the bodyguard went underneath there with him to make sure they didn't put a bomb underneath there. And that's the kind of story I think that, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a story about
I want
that.
her answer.
Yeah, yeah. So the a story about that. I was working in community mental health and did level 2 assessments in nursing facilities. And there was a nursing facility out here a little bit, and it closed several years ago. But that was supposedly, this is the claim to fame, and it must have been because I swear I did see the bullet holes in the wall, but that was used to be the real hideout, or the real fun spot for Al Capone when he was here, was that venue, and it got raided by the police, and the bullets holes were still in the wall, but it was converted into a nursing facility.
The
I can't
gorge.
remember the
The
name.
gorge.
Yes, and right out by the movie theater.
Mhm.
And I would go there to do those level 2s, and it was always so exciting because that's the story.
Right. Again, and my friends here are going to, I'm embarrassing them. Resource, Dr. and Brad and Kathy, Dr. Martin Dixon, his father was a dealer there, and Martin's still with us, correct, Kathy? And he has those stories. So if you ever get
Well,
to
there
that
you
point,
go.
yeah, that get to that
We got
point.
to make that connection because I think that you're onto something there, because it is an elusive tale. Um, and I will tell me, I don't know how many times I've told someone, well, when I did those level 2s, um, that was the real hideout there for Al Capone. I don't know if it's true, I assume, but you know, that would be good. Okay, you guys are going to this side now. What do you think? What's left?
I've probably got 3 or 4 good ones out there, but one that pops in my mind after listening to that is the outlaw gangs of Indiana. There were about this is from the Civil War to about 1900. There was a lot of disruption in the nation after the Civil War, especially in this area where you had pro-South people, and in Southern Illinois where I grew up, and really right through that whole shot of the Southern Northwest Territory and all, and into Missouri. I mean, that's the same group of people, upland Southerners. But the last outlaw gang, this was said in a newspaper, was from Du Bois, Martin, Orange County, right there in that corner around Hilltown. And they were the Reeves gang. And in 1885, the 2 boys came into town. The sheriff was after them, trying to arrest them, and they were up in, they couldn't get to them because they were too protected up there. But the 2 boys came into town to get a wagon. They were going to become peddlers and get out. And the dad was with them, and they got captured by 2 deputy sheriffs. And as they were going back to the jail in Jasper, the old man said to one of the deputies, he said, "I really like that pistol. That's a fine pistol. I've never seen a pistol like it. Can I look at it?" Well, they'd been drinking, the deputies. One of them was the sheriff's son. And he gave him the pistol, and the dad gave him to one of the boys, and he shot both of them. And both of them died. Took them a while. And then they escaped. So they escaped and disappeared down into Kentucky, and they were down there 10 years, and they changed their names, and they were outlaws there, and they were blowing up safes, and they learned how to pick locks. They were not typical outlaws. They weren't stupid, where they got caught real quick. And finally they got caught when they burned Tompkinsville downtown. They blew up a bank, and that they finally got arrested. So they're in jail in the Kentucky prison, and Du Bois County comes down to get them. This is 10 years after the murder. And Kentucky says, no, they got to serve their time. 30 years. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court in Kentucky ruled that they're going to conserve consecutive. So it's 10 years instead of 30. So they get out before Du Bois could get there. And no, they escape. Du Bois come down again. They escaped the night before, and they disappeared. So I'm finding this stuff looking in the old newspapers where you put this. So I'm putting their names in there, and where'd they go? Where'd they go? Where'd they go? Where'd they go? And I finally found them. They disappeared for about a year, and they reappeared. And when they reappeared, they were staying with my great-great-grandfather in Southern Illinois. What are the chances of that?
That's the book. That's the next one.
That
You gotta
just
get busy
floored
now.
me. And so they
Yeah.
got captured
Okay.
there, and they got brought back, and then they escaped again, and they killed the it's a lot of different stories in there mixed with all of this. But in looking at these outlaw stories and the gangs and killings and murders and all that, I could just do a thing on that sort of thing. Nobody served over 2 years for murder. It was justifiable homicide or manslaughter, or they were drunk and didn't mean it. It was amazing to me how
It's a lot
little
different.
anybody served if they killed somebody, in a small community. So
Well, that's definitely the next one for you. So,
Yeah.
okay, Roger, what about you? What
Okay.
do you think?
Well, I think these three people have set the bar pretty high. And my answer to the questions going to be short, not nearly as impressive as the thinking we've heard here this evening. I don't mean to suggest in this that there haven't been plenty of books, plenty of stories written about the challenges and struggles of earlier generations, as we know things about the Depression and the World War II years and things such as that. But what I have observed is I don't know that we've yet found a way to help younger generations understand, just understand and appreciate, and I call it grit, the grit of those earlier generations. My daughters, I don't think I could ever make them understand how difficult life was for my parents, and I suppose even much more so for their parents. And that's always kind of troubled me that not that they have to understand it, but it just like, and I've told people, if I had to live the way my parents lived and had to work as hard as they had to work in a more agrarian setting, I couldn't make it. I mean, and I really believe that. So, like I said, my answer's short, but that's something I would like to see us get out a little bit more.
So I'm glad that you said that, because that's definitely one of the things that I think having three children, and the oldest is 33 and the youngest is 18. And we've struggled with figuring out how to get even, our children to understand what the generations before. And I think it's exactly what you're talking about, is how do we write something or some medium or something that we can get folks to understand. Because when I tell stories about, like, even my childhood, or even with my parents, and they're, oh, mom, that didn't happen, no way, nobody really did that, or they didn't act that way. Yes, like, you did. We didn't go to McDonald's every other night if we wanted to. I mean, you were lucky to get to go. My mom was, I think, like 25 before she even went to a McDonald's. I mean, it was so different. And how do you teach that, the importance of that grit, which is exactly what you're talking about, the importance of the grit based on how you developed it then, because I think our kids develop grit too. They're doing quite well, and they're productive, and they know what they need to do, but there is this special thing, and I think that's what you're talking
I'm
about.
talking about that sun up to sundown,
Yes, like that.
never stopping.
Yes, I don't know, but you need to write that book and let us all know, so we'll know how to.
When I find out, let you know.
Yeah, but what I think from listening to all of you tonight, my thought is an appreciation, for the the for the storytelling, for the capturing of memories, for the capturing of emotions, and the capturing of these stories, because then they do live on somewhere. Somewhere they live on, and they can be used as examples,
Tool.
and a tool for.
To add to that point, I kind of had part of Roger's answer in for one of the questions that you posed.
Or that I
There's
didn't
the
pose,
yeah,
that
yeah,
you're
well,
reading.
yeah, yes. Um, this generation, I know that sounds old. Uh, they don't have to struggle with anything. Okay, don't know how to work on my truck? YouTube. Don't know how to make this personal decision? Ask all my followers. And uh, the rawness where, people of the generation even before us, you're out there on your own. You have to figure it out. And there's not this network of support. You maybe ask
Yeah.
mom or dad or your friend, and that was it. And you had to, as my father would say, make who ran off from the to the carnival when he was 14. ran away for 10 years. He said you have to make your own way, and I'm not for sure they're making their own way, but I'm not for sure their models that they're following are exactly the best they could be.
Yeah. So I that reminds me too of when I was 16 and I had a buy here, pay here car that some of you know Anthony's car lot in Orleans. And I would come over every Saturday morning and bring $35. And I paid on that car. But that car was a 1986 Hyundai Excel stick shift. Okay. And my dad would pay me $20 on Saturday to keep my mouth shut and go to a race car store in Louisville off of Spaghetti Junction and pick up race car parts. This was before cell phones. This was before GPS. You had a map, you had an
Right.
atlas, and you had no way. I mean, and there is, my mom did not know up until probably 10 years ago that he was paying me to keep my mouth shut to go get his parts in a car that I would never let my children go all the way to Louisville on Spaghetti Junction. If you've ever drove on
Right.
Spaghetti
Yeah.
Junction, it's frightening today,
Right.
let alone a 16-year-old kid in a junky car, stick shift, that I would never dream of allowing my kids to do. If I did that every Saturday for weeks during race car season.
Mention to a young person that you actually hitchhiked.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that they're just flabbergasted. Was it dangerous? Yes. Did I learn something from it? Yes. Was it an adventure? Yes. But
Yeah. What a conversation. How are we doing? Okay. Oh, I see our boss over here. So we have a little bit of time to kind of round up. So I am going to stick to the roundup question since I haven't done a very good job about that. Um, but so looking ahead to the America 250's birthday, what gives you hope about the stories future generations will tell about our community this time right here? What do you think? What do you think they'll say? What are you hoping they say? Don't all speak at once now.
okay. Um.
I would, I'm not sure what you can tell the next generation or the next generation. I think my children's generation will still listen to some of the stories because they've still got a bit of a foot in that basketball. Some of that is somewhat in their memory, so they're somewhat interested. After that, I don't know where you go with that because the world's changed so much. I think what I sense when I do the Larry Bird book signings and we sit around and talk, and my book's not about Larry Bird. I thought it was going to be. It's about basketball in the golden age of basketball of our generation. And that's what we talk about. And people share stories. One of the things I realized when we listen to old basketball game, and no matter who's playing, whether it's a school like I went to, a great big school, it sounds the same. The excitement, what's going on, and being said. So we all share in that,
Yeah.
no matter whether we played at a big place or barely started or riding the bench. And I think we're putting, when I write those stories and we go and we tell those stories, and I start to see some of these people passing on, we're putting our generation to bed. We're wrapping it up. And by golly, we're doing a beautiful job of it. And that's, I feel very strong. I feel very fortunate to still be alive to be able to share that as long as we can and put that generation to bed and say, well done. I would never wanted to live in any other era. I don't know what the kids in the future. I was just with my great nieces, and you couldn't talk to them. And finally, I knew they were having some issues with this and this each other, and so that's how I broke through. You know, we had some wonderful talks, but otherwise, they were just tapping on that phone the whole time, and so I don't worry about it too much, you know. And you can get through if you really work at it one on one. But that's my response to that. Maybe that's not hopeful, but it's beautiful. I think.
Well said. Okay, who's next? Everybody gets this
Okay,
one.
before I lose
You?
my train of thought,
Okay.
I think we're going to have to make a deal with the devil,
Okay.
and we're going to have to engage the technology, and we're just going to have to use avenues as educators, as parents, to guide them toward the good stuff. And if they, and also I think if we can get them to understand the perspective of, what are they going to say about you when you're gone? What are they going to say about the quality of your society when you're our age? And I think that if I think that will possibly could get them to clean up their act, and not so much quantity quantity of information and flying out there and tweets and stuff, but the quality. If we can get them to realize that somehow, I think we've got a chance. I won't be around to see it, but
And that's the way history's always worked in the past. I'm not sure if we have history anymore.
you're correct.
So that's I've thought about greatly. Yeah, I think about my grandparents. Oh, I worship them, and maybe so we're saying, oh, they'll see that beauty we're talking about now, and worship that. But I'm not sure if there's history there or not. But anyway, I'm glad I don't have to figure it out. I just tell stories.
Okay. All right. Who else? And then
I think it's going to depend on how much, like, parental, like, family genealogy, whatever. Who's talking to them? Who are they listening to? Because I know whenever I left teaching, and I told the kids I was resigning because I was going to go do something different. I taught for 23 years. I was tired. It was time to do something different. And one of the kids came back to class and he said, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "When you leave," he said, "who's going to tell us stories? Who's going to tell us about things from the past that our parents don't tell us? Who's going to answer questions that we have that our parents are too busy to answer and they tell us to go Google it?" He said, "Who's going to talk to us and
Right.
tell us?" And I said, "I don't know." I said, "You're going to have to find some other adult that you trust who can do that for you." I said, and that made me feel bad in that moment that I was leaving, because it's like, what are they going to do? I'm leaving them, because a lot of kids, the parents don't pay attention to them. They don't have any interaction. They're raising themselves. And so the last year I taught, I probably did more parenting in the classroom than I ever did teaching English. It was more just
Toward
talking
the end,
about
that was it.
how to behave and how to relate to other people and just, history and things like that. It's going to depend on who's talking to them. How much back history do they have already to, what I'm saying?
So yes, I do, and that's a comment now because I think that we have these conversations all the time in my household. I'll ask a question, they'll say, "Mom, go Google it." I'm like, "No, I can get my phone, and I can find any answer to any question. That's not why I'm asking you. So no, you tell me because I want to hear it from you." And so I do think you're onto that we as parents do have that responsibility to bring this back as a necessity, bring the storytelling and the communication back, and make that a priority, because that's where everyone is first, is in the family, right? I mean, that's where we start. So that's also where these types of this emphasis needs to start as well. Is because I can Google it, but that's not why I asked.
I would say that, just to back up and play at what you're saying, that you could still reach them with those stories probably in fifth and sixth grade.
I think
Fourth and
laying
fifth.
the foundation. That's a very
Bring
good
it
point.
back.
That would be, but we're not teaching history anymore. I was reading something else. We're so fractured.
State standards.
We're so fractured that nobody's, which narrative do we use? We can't even come in agreement with that. So that makes that difficult. But anyway, I think you're right. You can reach them when they're younger and plant some seeds there.
Yeah, and I think too that we're going to have the human connection is really going to be important. It's going to be sought after,
Right.
because the artificial information is going to be so abundant. We're going to crave our people again. I do.
I
I
think
think that
it's
now.
just psychology. Yeah.
Yes. Now I want to end it with you, so you do not get out of having to answer the question. So
Again, my answer is going to be short.
Okay.
And I'm going to say without apology that I don't know the answer. I mean, I think having heard the other three folks here address that question, they brought up some good points. I particularly was struck by what Ron said about what will the next generation say about us, and that's just something I would kind of have to ponder and see how that plays in, how that factors in.
So
I would
go
like
ahead.
to. I would like to change my answer.
Okay.
I just want them to listen to this podcast, and then they'll be all the
That's
problems will be
right.
solved.
So then they need to like and share
There,
and subscribe.
yeah, there you
Yeah,
go.
you know. So it's that we have to, we know that technology is here. We have to in some way embrace it, and we have to figure out how to utilize it in a way that is healthy and
Humanize
productive.
it.
We have to humanize it. So yeah, so you can definitely do all of that. But I do want to close this portion of our night by just saying thank you so much, all of you, for being here and doing this type of very crucial work, because you are the past, right now, and the future. Your stories matter for everyone. So again, thank you so much.
It's those little